Hello, I'm Scott Alsop, the creator of MrAlsopHistory.com. You can visit my website to find a host of other free materials on this topic and a whole load of others. In this episode, we're going to look at Weimar Germany between 1919 and 1929. You could say that after the First World War officially ended, Germany was faced with an ABC of crises. First, there was the abdication of the Kaiser, which left the government without any real authority. Secondly, a blockade by the British Navy meant that many Germans were starving. Meanwhile, communists plotted revolutions, like the one that had swept Russia just 2 years earlier. Furthermore, defeat in the First World War had left many Germans demoralised and bitter. Although Friedrich Ebert was elected the first president of the Weimar Republic, he realistically had very little experience and very little support, especially as he was the one who had led the government that signed the Treaty of Versailles. There was opposition to the terms of the treaty almost immediately, and many Germans continued to hold the agreement to blame for all the problems that Germany faced over the next few years, even after the situation improved. The Weimar Republic, as the government of Germany became known, were generally very unpopular up until 1923, but had a period of success from 1924 onwards. Therefore, this episode will focus on two ranges of years, 1919 to 23 and 1924 to 1929. Between 1919 and 1923, there were a series of attempted revolutions in Germany carried out by extremists on both sides of the political spectrum. Those uprisings led by the communists were designed to take advantage of the unstable political situation in Germany and to follow the example of Russia to establish a communist government. Other uprisings were conducted by right-wing nationalists who blamed the country's woes on the political class, the November criminals who had signed the armistice of November 1918. Many also believed in the Dolchstoß, or the stab in the back myth, that it was the civilians and politicians at home who had undermined Germany in 1918 and 1919, and so they were ultimately responsible for losing the war. The communists carried out their key attempted revolution in January 1919, in an event that became known as the Spartacist or Spartacist Revolt. Established by Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, who had been found guilty of high treason and imprisoned after they organised an anti-war demonstration in 1916, their Spartacist League declared itself the Communist Party of Germany in December 1918. Just a month later, on the 5th of January 1919, thousands of supporters swarmed into the Berlin streets and began occupying government and press offices. 2 days later, around 500,000 people began a general strike. By this point, however, Ebert had hired Freikorps to crush the revolt. These unofficial armed gangs of returning soldiers put down the revolt both quickly and violently. On the 15th of January, Luxemburg and Liebknecht were arrested, tortured, interrogated, and eventually executed. In March 1920, the Freikorps themselves attempted to seize power in the Kapp Putsch. Although the Freikorps volunteer paramilitary units had been ordered to disband after the signing of the Treaty of Versailles, two leading Freikorps units refused the order to dissolve. Already opposed to the democratic Weimar government, the unit under the command of Captain Hermann Erhardt occupied Berlin with the cooperation of General Walter von Luttwitz, the district army commander. 2 days earlier, Luttwitz had approached right-wing journalist Wolfgang Kapp and some other leading military figures in preparation for taking over the government. After the putsch was launched, they swiftly occupied government buildings and met no opposition from regular troops stationed in the city, while officials generally accepted the coup. However, the putsch was far less popular with the general population. After the Weimar government fled to Dresden, President Ebert issued a cabinet proclamation calling for a general strike to defeat the putsch. Supported by the major trade unions and leftist parties, the people of Berlin refused to cooperate with the Kapp government, and services ground to a halt. More than 12 million workers went on strike from the 14th of March, paralysing essential services ranging from water to transportation. The general strike ensured that those who supported Kapp couldn't move around and ran out of supplies. Less than a week later, with the putsch a complete failure, Kapp himself was forced to flee to Sweden. Despite the defeat of these two major uprisings, it was clear that the situation in Germany was highly unstable. Even after the Spartacists and Freikorps had been defeated, there were murders of two government ministers, one of whom had signed the armistice. Furthermore, a number of extremist political parties began to appear. These included the small German Workers' Party in Munich, which Adolf Hitler became leader of in 1921. In the midst of the crisis of law and order, the government became more and more unpopular, appearing to be incredibly weak as it was not able to deal effectively with the ongoing revolutions and unrest. On the 11th of January 1923, French and Belgian forces marched into Germany and occupied the Ruhr, the main industrial area of the country. Both France and Belgium had grown increasingly frustrated by Germany frequently defaulting on the reparations that had been agreed in the Treaty of Versailles. They established the Inter-Allied Mission for Control of Factories and Mines to ensure that goods payments were made, but the Germans responded with a campaign of passive resistance that stopped production. This strike by the German workers only resulted in the French and Belgians bringing in their own workers and cutting the area off from the rest of Germany. Tensions were high between the occupiers and Ruhr locals, and in an attempt to handle the economic fallout, the government of Germany began printing more money, partly to pay the striking workers and partly in an attempt to pay off some of its debt. However, this uncontrolled increase of money contributed to the rampant hyperinflation that had begun to cripple the economy from before the occupation even began. Hyperinflation is the name given to the massive rise in prices and devaluation of currency that took place in 1923 and affected everyone in Germany. Since so much money was now floating around the country without there being anything to spend it on, the prices of goods skyrocketed. Many Germans found that their life savings were wiped out and people who lived on pensions were ruined. Prices rose every hour. The effect was that people rushed to buy goods as soon as they were paid in order to avoid further price increases. They bought anything that was available at the time because otherwise their money would lose value immediately. This led to the emergence of a barter system where people exchanged goods rather than money, while in some cases shopkeepers did their best to keep their shops closed and avoid selling anything at all. So, if the situation was so appalling in 1923, how did Germany recover? Well, it all began with a new chancellor, Gustav Stresemann, who brought hyperinflation under control and was therefore seen as a good leader by many Germans. Stresemann was aware that the situation was unsustainable and, despite having been Chancellor for only 6 weeks, called off passive resistance in the Ruhr and started to pay reparations again. By ending the strikes and restarting reparations payments, Stresemann was able to slow down the economic crisis that was enveloping the country and show that he accepted the international realities of the new era. This marked the start of Germany's international rehabilitation, although within Germany it was met with opposition from both left and right extremists. For that reason, Stresemann asked President Ebert to announce a state of emergency under Article 48 of the Constitution on the same day. Stresemann also ordered all the old banknotes to be collected in and burned. He replaced them with a new currency, the Rentenmark, which was backed by the land of Germany rather than by gold, and it stopped hyperinflation in its tracks. Stresemann was also able to deal with a number of other problems facing Germany in the 1920s, and so the country began to recover from the effects of the First World War. In 1924, he borrowed money from the USA to help Germany pay its reparations in a loan system that was called the Dawes Plan, after the name of its creator. Under the Dawes Plan, America would loan money through government bonds to Germany, who would use it to pay reparations to Britain and France. They, in turn, would use the money to pay their war debts to America. The flow of money helped to ensure that the countries were each able to help their industries recover, and the trade that emerged helped to improve relations between them. With the international economic situation recovering day by day, in 1925 Stresemann began to pursue his foreign policy of normalising relations with Germany's former enemies. Signed in December 1925, the Locarno Treaties saw Germany promise to respect the western borders as laid out in the Treaty of Versailles. A year later, Germany was admitted to the League of Nations, and Germany became a permanent member of the Council. Outside politics, there were also achievements in the arts and culture. Painters, playwrights, musicians and authors all helped to make Germany, and Berlin in particular, a famous centre for the arts and music in Western Europe. This cultural revival saw the emergence of new styles of art that challenged the more traditional styles that had dominated the period before the First World War. The new Bauhaus movement in particular provided a springboard for a host of young and dynamic designers and architects, while the relatively young medium of cinema flourished with German directors such as the expressionist Fritz Lang, whose 1927 film Metropolis is recognised as one of the greatest films of its age. By the late 1920s, therefore, it appeared that Germany had recovered from the humiliation of Versailles and was viewed as an equal by the other countries of Europe. However, it's important not to be too blinkered by this view. A popular history exam question asks how far Germany had recovered by 1929, and so it's important to remember that despite the evident successes of the so-called Golden Age of Weimar, there were still significant problems. One of the most evident problems was that many traditional Germans disliked the new art movements and felt that the Weimar government was actively destroying German tradition. Seen by many as evidence of a post-war moral corruption, the new forms of art inspired significant distaste from older and less urban parts of German society. In terms of politics, the Weimar Republic was also still unstable. Although there were no major uprisings like the ones before 1924, extremist parties, including the Communists and the Nazis, were able to grow their support, even as Stresemann appeared to be winning the political middle ground. Peasant farmers and some sections of the middle class saw their earnings dwindle as production outstripped demand, and many looked with bitterness at the wealth that appeared to be benefiting everyone except themselves. Amidst this bitterness, the extremists grew smart and began to refine their approach to become more acceptable to the wider populace. The vast gulf that separated the various elements of German politics was evident in national elections, which repeatedly resulted in coalition governments who struggled to work together. 4 different chancellors struggled to unite and lead Germany between 1924 and 1929, meaning that many ordinary Germans began to question the effectiveness of a democratic government. The election of Hindenburg as president in 1925 is a particularly good example of this feeling, since he was strongly opposed to democracy. However, probably the biggest example of Weimar's limited recovery is the Dawes Plan itself. Although the Dawes Plan did untold amounts of good for Germany in the short term, it's important to remember that the new German prosperity was built entirely on loans. If America was to withdraw the funding or demand repayment, Germany would be in deep trouble. That is exactly what happened on the 24th of October 1929, when Wall Street, the American stock exchange, crashed. This economic disaster sent shockwaves around the world and sparked the Great Depression. The Dawes Plan fell apart as America demanded all its money back from Germany, leaving the already precariously positioned nation in a frightful economic situation. By 1932, 6 million Germans, a third of the entire adult workforce, were out of work, vastly more than in any other country in the world at the time. The desperation felt by the German people led to extreme measures. Less than 4 years after the Wall Street crash, Adolf Hitler had come to power.